A young engineer, blinded by his arrogance and racism, decides to humiliate a black bricklayer without knowing that he is about to destroy his own career. How will he react when he discovers that he has just challenged a construction legend? It was a hot summer morning in Bogota. The construction of a modern shopping center in the heart of the city was in full swing. Workers were coming and going. The sound of cement mixers and hammering echoed throughout the site. Among them was Samuel, a man with a face weathered by years of working under the sun, his gaze reflecting the determination of someone who knew that the sweat of his brow had earned him more than a salary. It had earned him respect in his field. Samuel was not an ordinary bricklayer. He had decades of experience, and his name was known in many of the city's largest projects. People called him the Great Samuel. But despite his renown, few truly knew who he was. No one imagined that the man with rough hands and a deep voice had built more buildings than even the engineers who looked down on him could count. Engineer Daniel Guzman, young, freshly graduated, and with the typical arrogance of someone who had yet to face the harsh realities of the working world, was overseeing the project at that moment. With his safety helmet perfectly placed, he walked around the work site, eyes focused on every detail. He thought he had everything under control. Samuel, as usual, was at the back of the site, inspecting one of the structures that would be erected in the coming days. He was carefully examining the foundation, aware that even the smallest mistake could compromise the safety of the entire project. Engineer Guzman saw him from a distance, standing in a spot that wasn't marked on the blueprints. His face filled with disdain. Without thinking, he quickly approached and, in an authoritative tone, shouted, "Hey, you! What are you doing here? This is the work of engineers, not laborers. Get out of here!" he exclaimed with a mix of contempt and superiority. Samuel, surprised by the young man's harshness, slowly raised his gaze. His eyes, though filled with years of experience, reflected a calmness that only someone who had faced life's toughest challenges could possess. "I'm checking the foundation, making sure everything is all right," he replied, with a deep voice but without getting upset. Guzman would not tolerate it. With a mocking laugh, he stepped closer. "What do you know about foundations, old man? This place is run by engineers, not lifelong bricklayers like you. If you don't get out of here, I'll throw you out," he said, not measuring his words. Samuel looked at the young man. His gaze hardened for a second, but he said nothing. He knew him. He knew. He was one of those engineers who had arrived with the wind at their back, not understanding the hard work that construction really involved. He believed that a university degree gave him power over the men who worked hard, not realizing that true wisdom is earned in the field, not in classrooms. "All right, Mr. Engineer," said Samuel, stepping away without making any further noise. But his face no longer showed just calmness. There was something else in his eyes, something the young engineer could not understand. For days, Guzman continued overseeing the project with the same attitude of superiority. He mocked the workers, criticized their lack of professionalism, and never stopped trying to impose his authority, as if being an engineer meant being infallible. No one dared contradict him, fearing retaliation. But the day came when everything started to unravel. One early Thursday, one of the workers approached Guzman, concern written on his face. There was something strange about the foundations of one of the main walls. It seemed the concrete was not curing properly, and there were signs that it could collapse in the coming days. The engineer, confident in his academic knowledge, ignored the warning. "Those are just exaggerations. The foundations are perfect. The problem is that you don't know anything about engineering," he replied arrogantly. By evening, Samuel approached the young engineer. With his usual calm, he said, "Mr. Guzman, I believe there's an issue with the foundations. We should check that wall. If something happens, we'll not only lose the project, but lives as well." Guzman, in his infinite arrogance, ignored him. "What do you know? The foundations are fine. I don't know why you're so worried, old man," he said, and walked away without looking back. The next morning, tragedy struck unexpectedly. The entire construction site shook with the thunderous sound of a partial collapse in one of the most important walls of the building. Chaos broke out. The workers rushed to make sure everyone was safe, while Guzman, pale and sweaty, try to understand what had happened. The structure had fallen, right where Samuel had pointed. The engineer couldn't believe what he was seeing. He ran to the spot, his mind filled with doubts and fear. When he saw the workers already working to clear the wreckage, he saw Samuel standing there, his gaze fixed on the ruin. The old man had been the first to arrive at the site, as always. "I told you, Guzman, the foundations were wrong," said Samuel in a grave tone. The young engineer, humiliated, tried to say something but couldn't. The weight of his mistake was too great to ignore. Words wouldn't come out. At that moment, Samuel looked at him intently, without saying another word. The engineer understood. He had made the biggest mistake of his career. The chaos continued at the construction site. The workers, although worried, knew that Samuel was the one best equipped to handle the situation. Without saying much, he organized the workers, guiding them to secure the area while the safety team assessed the damage. The young engineer Guzman, pale-faced, stood by, watching from the sidelines, too afraid to intervene. Samuel wasn't just a bricklayer. He was a man who had built buildings under much worse conditions, who had seen ruins, but also the rewards of his effort. He knew that if they didn't act quickly, the project would be halted indefinitely, which could ruin everyone involved. After several hours of intense work, and with the help of the other workers, the situation was stabilized. The area was secured, and although the damage was considerable, there were no fatalities. But the atmosphere was tense. Samuel approached Guzman, who still hadn't said a word. "What happened here isn't just about the foundations," Samuel said in a low but firm tone. "If you had paid attention to the warnings from those of us who know this work, we wouldn't be here." Guzman, his face full of shame, looked at the ground. The arrogance he had shown days earlier seemed to have vanished. The young engineer finally understood what he had never wanted to admit. Knowledge isn't obtained solely at university. Real knowledge is forged through experience, through years of hard work. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to listen," Guzman murmured, not daring to lift his eyes. Samuel nodded, his face showing no sign of anger, but carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned too much from life. It's not enough to know. You have to know how to listen, especially when those around you have the experience you still don't have. Sometimes, pride blinds you more than anything else, but you still have time to learn. Engineer Guzman, though embarrassed, nodded. Samuel wasn't the type of man who sought revenge or reprimands, but he did teach through actions. He didn't need to humiliate the young man, as the mistake had already done the job for him. In the days that followed, Guzman began to learn, to observe, to ask questions. He approached Samuel, who, without hesitation, showed him how to review the plans in detail, how to check every component of the construction, how to care for the smallest details. Samuel didn't give him direct lessons, but his gestures and his way of working showed him more than any university class ever could. Time passed, and the construction continued. The project was a success, but more importantly, it was a lesson that the young engineer would never forget. Over the months, Guzman began to be recognized for his work, not just for his degree, but for his ability to listen and learn. Though he never became an expert like Samuel, his name started to be synonymous with responsibility and effort. Samuel, for his part, kept doing what he knew best, building. He didn't need recognition. He knew that his legacy wasn't measured by titles, but by what he had achieved with his hands, in every building he had erected, in every piece of advice he had given. And so, the lesson remained etched in the memory of everyone involved in that project. The story of how an arrogant engineer learned not to underestimate those who, despite not having a title, had the experience of building the world around them.